Barack Obama there. Tom Switzer is a research associate with the United States Studies Centre at Sydney University. He joins me now. Tom Switzer, welcome.
Joe.
The obvious thing is that they do get on well.
Oh, no question. But to be fair, I think President Obama also had a very good relationship with Kevin Rudd. He described their last meeting as the meeting of the minds, and I think it's fair to say that Republicans and Democrats have had good relationships with Labor and Liberal Prime Ministers over the years.
Yeah, the political cycles seem to be in sync in the US and Australia with conservative and left-leaning leaders in charge at the same time.
That's true, but bear in mind, Bob Hawke was a Labor Prime Minister when Ronald Reagan was the President, and of course Harold Holt was a Liberal Prime Minister when Lyndon Johnson was President. So I think this is the thing about the US alliance, it does go across party lines.
We'll go to the substance of things now. Afghanistan was one of the items at the top of the agenda. A year of transition. Australia and the US basically in agreement on where we're heading there.
They are, although interestingly last December the United States government did put out a review flagging the idea of withdrawing troops or starting the withdrawal process as early as July this year. The President didn't mention that at all today, and in many respects he may have even pushed back that deadline. But the problem, I think, right now for the coalition right now is that in Afghanistan they're facing a very fierce and potentially bloody season as the Taliban is starting to prepare for the losses that they made after the surge of the US forces. So, you know, the Dutch have pulled out of the province now that Australia is filling the void. The Canadians are probably pulling out later this year. So it's very hard, I think, for Australia and America to keep a straight face when the blood and treasure is increasing.
Can we assume that maybe, because at these press conferences after these discussions you don't get any hint of any disagreement, but can we assume that maybe Julia Gillard might have pushed Barack Obama on that timetable for withdrawal, saying you're going to go too soon?
Well, no evidence indicates that Julia Gillard is prepared to do that. I mean, all the available evidence suggests that she, in many respects, is more hawkish than the US President. I mean, she's talking about the Australian troops being there for potentially a whole decade. Now, the President and his Vice President, Joe Biden, especially, has been very keen to get out there, withdraw troops from Afghanistan, ideally by 2014. That was certainly the agreement reached at Lisbon at the NATO summit last November, when there was an agreement that the coalition forces would pass over security to the Afghan authorities. So I don't see any evidence that Julia Gillard is keen to withdraw Australian troops or encourage President Obama to withdraw the troops anytime soon.
Yeah, so can we assume that in that meeting she probably did suggest to him that maybe his timetable for withdrawal is too soon?
That's conceivable, and of course one has to bear in mind and put these things in historical context. The Australians during the 1960s were arguably more hawkish than the Americans about the Vietnam War, so it's quite conceivable that she was more reluctant than the President to withdraw troops. But I think time and the resources are not on Australia's or America's side here. The Afghanistan Taliban will still be there when the troops go, and it's a very difficult and bloody fight. And we've seen 23 troops. Interestingly, since Prime Minister Gillard has been in the top job, more than half of our 23 troops have died. That's no reflection on her, it's just a reality that Australia is now doing more weight in the Oregon province now that the Dutch have left, and there's no evidence to suggest that will change anytime soon.
Now, on Libya, I thought it was interesting that Barack Obama took the opportunity to specifically spell out that warning to people around Gaddafi that they will bear as much responsibility for their actions as Gaddafi himself if he is arrested eventually.
Look, it was a very significant statement by the President, because as the ABC News has been reporting over the past week or so, he has been surprisingly quiet on the issue of Libya. So he's come out now, and they were pretty significant words. Of course, Prime Minister Gillard could only back that up. But you know, the point is that the Americans are now starting to get very edgy. There is a real chance that Libya could descend into a civil war.
There was a lot of talk going into this meeting about how far Julia Gillard has moved on a carbon tax, and how Barack Obama might be a bit envious of how far she has been able to proceed down that path so far. And he did make mention of a green future in his talks
well,
afterwards.
I think the President is probably lamenting the opportunities when he had the Democrats controlling both the House and the Senate. In 2009, the Democrats did pass a very modest climate bill, but it was a price on carbon called cap and trade. We call it an ETS. But the Senate last year, even though the Democrats had 60 senators out of 100, still couldn't even debate, much less pass, a climate bill that consisted of little but loopholes to the so-called big polluters. So he's really lost the opportunity to price carbon either via a tax or an emissions trading scheme. his best chance is doing it through regulation via the Environmental Protection Agency.
But now she's facing this poll today, a news poll saying she's only got 30%, or Labor's got a primary vote of 30%.
Well, it's true, but if she has the numbers in the Senate, she could certainly pass that legislation. The problem that Australia would have, arguably, is that it doesn't make much sense to price carbon economy-wise when a major player like the United States that contributes to 20% of global emissions, maybe 22%, won't have an economy-wide pricing system. Now, it is true that there are 10 states in the United States that do price carbon, but those states don't represent, they're not heavily dependent on coal or oil or manufacturing. No resources or fossil fuels. So the economy-wide cap-and-trade scheme or a carbon tax is what the Americans really need if they want to take something to the next round of UN discussions in South Africa later this year.
Now, we don't usually see as much of Barack Obama as we've had this morning with the visit of Julia Gillard. And there's a lot of talk this morning about how great the rapport is between Julia Gillard and Barack Obama. He seems so comfortable in the role now. Does that have as much to do with the fact that he is on a good thing at the moment in the US, having had a few wins, unemployment is down? Is he in a good place now, a much better place than he was 6 months ago?
I think there's no question he's in a much better place, and that's largely because the Republicans themselves are very divided. Certainly there are no obvious Republican presidential candidates or viable ones to keep him up late at night. But legislatively, yes, he has scored some victories. But look, he's still got a very tough slog. I mean, Afghanistan's shown the public opposition in both the United States and Australia to the war in Afghanistan is mounting. He has to deal with Afghanistan. He still has a lot of problems on his healthcare front. Remember, he did pass the healthcare legislation through the Senate a year ago.
But that could still be repealed.
It could still be repealed and could even go to the Supreme Court. So he'll still have some challenges on the domestic front. Climate change-wise, he won't be able to legislate anything through the Senate. His best bet is through the executive process. But there are challenges, and he is looking good politically. But, a week is a long time in politics, and the next US election is until November next year.
Yeah. And just finally, it'll be a big moment for Julia Gillard when she addresses this joint sitting of Congress.
She's been afforded a wonderful opportunity. Only 3 Australian Prime Ministers in our history have had that honour. Bob Hawke in 1988, John Howard, of course, in 2002, and Sir Robert Menzies at the height of the Korean War. I think this is a respect of the long-standing significance of the alliance. It is a centrepiece of Australian foreign policy. It's been a good thing for the United States. And it's also probably a reward for Julia Gillard's steadfast commitment to the war in Afghanistan.
And important for her too in terms of trying to improve her credibility in the area of foreign relations.
Conceivably, yes. She does have a mixed bag. She made a few stuff-ups last week in Parliament.
And she said she doesn't particularly like it.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. But look, she looked very good this morning, I thought. I think that most Australians would recognise that she did a good job this morning, and the alliance is in a safe pair of hands.
Okay, Tom Switzer, thank you.
Thanks, Joe.